Shalom. We're continuing Shmuel Beis, and we're up to Perek Vav. Basically, remember that David had conquered Yerushalayim, or at least a portion of Yerushalayim that had previously not been conquered. And that became known as Ir David. And once he conquers Yerushalayim, he wants to bring the Aron HaKodesh into Yerushalayim. Remember that from the time that the Aron had been returned by the Plishtim, it had remained in Kiryat Ya'arim, modern-day Telstone, in the house of Avinadav, and the Aron is going to be moved from Beis Avinadav to a tent in Yerushalayim. And that is the story of Perek Vav. Vayisafai David has called Bocher B'Yisrael Shleishim Aleph. David had assembled an army of 30,000. This is really connected to the preceding Perek in terms of his milchamas. But now the story begins. Vayakam v'yelech David v'chol am asher itai mibale Yehuda. That David and all of the people from Shevet Yehuda came lahalais misham, to bring up from Kiryas Ya'arim es Arayin Elokim, the Arayin of Hashem, Asher Nikra Shem, that on this Arayin is the name of Hashem. And what name of Hashem is it? Shem Hashem Tzivakos, the Lord of hosts, the Tzavaos of Shemayim Va'aretz, Yoshev HaKruvim, who dwells on top of the two Keruvim, right? Hashem is called the Yoshev HaKruvim. Hashem is, of course, everywhere. But he's Yoshev HaKruvim because he communicates to the Nevi'im mibein Shnei HaKruvim. So they're going to move the Aron from Kiryas Ya'arim to Yerushalayim. Pasuk Gimel says, V'yarkivu eis Aron Elokim el Agala Chadasha. They positioned the Arayin of Hashem on a newly constructed wagon that would be led by oxen. Vayisa'uhu mibeis Avinadav asher b'giva. And they carried the Aron and transported it to the wagon from the house of Avinadav, which was on top of a hill. V'uza v'achyo b'nei Avinadav. And Uzzah and Achio, both of whom were the sons of Avinadav, Naihagim es ha'agala hachadasha, they were leading this wagon, which means the wagon was attached by oxen that were drawing the wagon, and Uzzah and Achio were leading the oxen. Vayisa'uhu mibeis Avinadav asher bagiva imaran elokim. And they were leading the wagon from the house of Avinadav, and that wagon contained the Aron Hashem. The Achio holech lifnei ha'aron. Achio was standing in front of the Aron, that means in front of the wagon. But we're going to see that Uzzah was standing on the side of the wagon. And we'll see what the issue is. V'David v'chol Beis Yisrael Misachakim lifnei Hashem b'chol atzei baroshin. David and all of Am Yisrael that were there, they were dancing and singing, and they were playing musical instruments made from this precious wood. Kinoros, these are harps, nevalim, also stringed instruments. Tupim, drums. Nanaim, these are kind of tambourines. Tzeltzalim are cymbals. Vayavo ad geiren nachain. And as they were traveling, they came to the threshing floor of a person whose name was Nachon. Vayishlach Uzzah el Aron Elokim vayechaz bay. Uzzah sent forth his hand to grasp the Aron Elokim, ki shamtu habakar. The cattle had tripped on something, and therefore they veered to the side, and that tipped over the wagon. So it looked as if the Aron HaKodesh was going to fall off the wagon. So Uzzah put forth his hand to straighten out the Aron. And the pasuk says, "Vayichar af Hashem be'Uzzah." Hashem was angry at Uzzah. Vayakeu sham Elokim al hashal, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu smote him because of his accidental aveira. Vayamas sham im arayin Elokim, and he died right next to the Aron Hashem. So what's interesting here is that the Pshutai Shal Mikra and the Messiah of Chazal seem to be moving in different directions. The Pshutai Shal Mikra was that the Aveira of Uzzah was touching the Aron HaKodesh. Now his kavana was L'Shem Shamayim, because he literally believed that the Aron was in danger of falling, just like today. If we saw Chas v'Shalom, somebody doing Hagbah, and it looks like they're not going to hold on to the Torah, we would jump forward to grab the Torah. But his mistake was that Chazal tell us, Aron naiseyas naisav, that even when it looks like you're carrying the Aron is really carrying you. And to believe that the Aron needed to be carried by the wagon, and it couldn't support itself, b'derech nes, was a chisaron in emunah, for which Uzzah was chayev misa. That is pshuto shal mikra, because the pasuk pshat of the pasuk simply says that the aveira was that Uzzah sent forth his hand to adjust the Aron. That was the aveira. But Chazal actually learned the whole Maisa differently. They learn that the Aveira actually occurred at an earlier stage. The Aveira was putting the Aron on a wagon to begin with, because the Torah says beferish that the Aron has to be avoda bakosef, it has to be carried on the shoulders, and you cannot put it in a wagon. Many parts of the Mishkan were transported on wagons, the krushim, the boards, the ariyos, the curtains, they were on wagons. But the Aron HaKodesh had to be bekasef. So, according to that pshat, if the Aveira for which they were chayav misa was putting the Aron on an agola, then it's not clear why would Uzzah be the one that's punished. I mean, after all, Achyo and Uzzah both did it. So they both should have been punished. So it seems to be that Avada, there are two Averas here. Avera number one is putting the Aron on an agola rather than Avoda Bakosef. Avera number two is adjusting the Aron, and only Uzzah had both Averas, and that's why he was Chayiv Misa. But the emes is, what Chazal say is Mukhrach from the parallel account in Divrei Hayamim, where indeed it emphasizes that David himself is Maida, that there was an Aveira to put the Aron on an Agola. Now, in truth, the Aron was in an Agola once before, and that's how the Pelishtim returned to the Aron. But again, that was not a problem, because Hashem has no interest in the Pelishtim carrying the Aron Bakasef, so them returning it in an Aron was the kavadika thing to do. But for Am Yisrael, the Aron has to be carried Bakasef. So, this was a tremendous tragedy. This is supposed to be a very happy occasion. We are moving the Aron from Kiryas Ya'arim to Yerushalayim, Ir HaKodesh, to Ir David, and everyone is singing and dancing, and yet Uzzah tragically dies on the very day of that Simcha because he did not show proper kavod to the Aron of Hashem. Again, there's a parallel to Nadav and Avihu dying the day of the Chanukas HaMishkan. And Pasuk Ches says, Vayichar leDavid al asher paratz Hashem peretz ba'Uzzah. And David was agitated. David was very upset. It doesn't mean, Vayichar usually means angry, but here it's not anger, it's agitation and being upset. That God broke through, God made a breach in Uzzah by destroying him. And as a result, Vayikra lamakay mahu peretz Uzzah ada yom hazeh. And therefore the place that had previously been known as Geiren Nachon, the threshing floor of a man whose name was Nachon, got a new name, Peretz Uzzah, the breaking or the breach of Uzzah. And Ad Hayom Hazeh, it was still called that name in the time of the Navi who wrote the Shmuel Beis, which is actually God HaNavi. Vayira David es Hashem b'yomahu, and David now had a lot of pachad because David understands that if you don't treat the Aron HaKodesh with all of the respect that it is due, chas v'shalom, there can be death. Vayomer, eich yavai elai Aron Hashem. How can I bring the Aron to Yerushalayim? Chas v'shalom, with all the crowds of people, different people coming. Perhaps there will be a lack of kavod and people will die. And therefore, David lahasir elav Aron Hashem alir David. So on the way, right, we're going from Kiryas Yearim to Ir David, that part of Yerushalayim in the south, where the Harabayas is. And David decided he didn't want to bring the Aron HaKodesh to Ir David. Vayateu David Beis Oved Edom Hagiti. So temporarily, the Aron was stored in the halfway point between Kiryas Yearim and Yerushalayim, in the house of a Jewish man, but his name was Oved Edom, a strange name. Literally, that means a servant of Edom. Perhaps he had been an Eved for Esav. Hagiti, who was originally from the city of Gas. The Meforshim explained, though, that Oved Edom is actually a Levi, and as a Levi, he would be entrusted with protecting the Aron. Now, one might understand it in a very selfish way. Oh, David doesn't want to himself have death in Ir David, so he says, put it in Oved Edom's house and let Oved Edom have all the tzaras. But that's not the issue. The issue probably was, as I said a moment ago, that David was afraid that if the Aron would be in a Makkah Meforsim, there's more of a likelihood of kalas reish or mistakes. In Oved Edom's house, it would be in a private place. And indeed, it was kept in the house of Oved Edom, Shleisha Chadashim, for 3 months. And during that time, V'yavarech Hashem es Oved Edom v'eskol Beisai. And because of the Aron, Oved Edom and all of his family were greatly blessed. And Rashi brings from Divrei Hayamim again that he had 8 sons who were married, and his wife, and each of them gave birth to 6 sons. His wife and his 8 daughters-in-law gave birth to 6 sons each in those 3 months. In those 3 months, an amazing miracle. So at this point, David sees that the Aron is kind of a double-edged sword. It can create tremendous onesh and midas hadin, but it can also create tremendous bracha. And therefore, Vayugad lamelech David lemor beirach Hashem es beis Oved Edom v'yes kol asher lai ba'avor arein elokim. When it was told to David that Hashem gave the house of Oved Edom and all of his family a tremendous bracha, because they were taking care of the Aron. Vayelech David, vayalas Aron Elokim, mi beis Oved Edom, Ir David, b'simcha. So now David sees that the Aron is a good thing to have. So David brings the Aron of Hashem from beis Oved Edom to Ir David, b'simcha. Now I want to point out that Divrei Hayamim adds a prat that does not appear in the book of Shmuel, and that is, this time, David did not make the mistake of putting the Aron on an agala. This time, the Aron was carried by Kosef, as it should have been all along. Vayihi, so now everything, Baruch Hashem, is going to be good. Vayihi ki tzadu nosei Aron Hashem shisha tzadim. Every 6 steps they would stop, and they would bring korbanos. Remember that at this time, bamas are permitted, so korbanos can actually be brought anywhere. So in the procession, after 6 steps, they would shecht a shor, an ox, umari, and a fattened cattle as a korban. V'David mecharker b'chol ha'is lifnei Hashem, and David is dancing with all of his strength in front of Hashem. That means in front of the Aron of Hashem. V'David chagor ephod bad, and David is wearing a special ephod. Now, ephod normally means the big day kahuna of a Kohen Gadol, but here it just means a very dignified robe of linen in honor of the occasion. David v'chol Beis Yisrael ma'alim es Aron Hashem batrua v'kol shofar, and David and all of Am Yisrael, they're bringing the Aron into Ir David bitrua, with joyous singing, ubekol shofar, and in blowing the shofar. V'haya Aron Hashem ba Ir David, and as the Aron Hashem enters the part of Yerushalayim in the south, near the Harabayas, that is called Ir David, Michal bat Shaul, who is David's wife, Nishkafa biyad hachalain, she is looking from the window. Vateres hamelech David mefazez umecharker lifnei Hashem, and she sees David jumping and dancing in front of the Aron HaKodesh. Vatevaz loy belibai, and she looked at him despicably in her heart. She thought, this is as pasnished. This is not the way a king behaves, wild, jumping, dancing. It is not in accord with the dignity of a melech. Vayaviu es Aron Hashem, and they brought the Aron Hashem. Again, there's no Beis Hamikdash yet. Vayotzigu oso bimkomo betocha ohel asher natolai David. So at this point, it was simply in a tent. David HaMelech built a tent, and the Aron was kept in the tent. Vayal David olos lifnei Hashem, and David brought burnt offerings, ushlamim, and peace offerings. Vayichal David mehalos ha'olav ha'shlamim, and after David finished with the olos and the shlamim, vayivarech es ha'am, he blessed the assembly of people. B'shem Hashem tzavakot, in the name of Hashem. Vayichalek l'chol ha'am l'chol ha'man Yisrael l'mei'ish v'yad isha, and he distributed, as it were, shirayim, refreshments, to all of the crowds that were there, the men and the women. Li'ish chalas lechem achas, every man got, actually every person really means, every person got chalas lechem achas, one little loaf of bread, eshbar echad, one serving of meat, v'yashisha achas, and one container of wine. So you had bread, meat, and wine. Now this may have been from the korbanos. The meat may have been from the shlamim, or it may have been stam meat. I mean, the nafkamina would be, if it's a shlamim, it would have to be eaten. Well, actually, it's not so pashat. Where a shlamim would be eaten when you bring it in a bama. I mean, normally shlamim are eaten in Yerushalayim, but that's only after there's a Beis Hamikdash. So I don't know, it's a little bit of a shaila. But again, there's no particular raya that this was kachim. This could have been chulin, the bread, the meat, and the wine. Vayelech kol ha'am ish lebeso, and everybody went home, b'simcha. Vayashav David levarech es beso, and then David went home to bless his own family, his own personal family, his wives and his children. Vateitze Michal bat Shaul likras David, and Michal bat Shaul, who's very upset, comes to greet David. Vatomer, and she says to David, Ma, sarcastically, Ma nichbad hayayim melech Yisrael, how honorable, how great is this day, King of Israel. Asher nigla hayayim li'enei amais avadav, that you reveal yourself today in front of the lowliest maidservants. Ki galot niglot achad harekim, like an empty-headed person, like a clown, like a comedian, like a drunk, jumping and prancing and dancing. And even the servants look down at you for your undignified behavior. So Michal is arguing that a melech has to behave in a kovedik way. Vayomer David al Michal, But David says to Michal, Lifnei Hashem, I did this in front of God. Asher bachar bi me'avicha. So David is getting a little bit of a shtach there too. Hashem, who chose me over your father. Umikol Beiso, and all of your father's family. Bachar bi me'avich, it's feminine. Me'avich, from your father. Litzavos osi nagid alam Hashem, al Yisrael. And he commanded me to be a leader over the nation of Hashem, and Am Yisrael. V'sichakti. And all of my sechayk, all of my play, all of my dancing and prancing is lifnei Hashem, was to serve Hashem. Unekalaisi oid mizais. And even if I were to behave in more of a kalas reish way, more of a manner of levity, v'hayisi shafal b'einai, and I would become lowly in my own eyes. V'im ha'mahos asher amart, and I would be in front of the maidservants that you said, how dare I mavaza myself in front of the maidservants. In front of those very maidservants. Imam ikaveda, I will be honored in front of them. Because that which you do to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu is only an honor. The Rambam, in Hilchos Sukkah, when the Rambam describes the great, great joy of the Simchas Beis HaShayeva, the water-drawing ceremonies of Sukkot that they would celebrate all night, and Chazal say in Maseches Sukkah that the person that did not see Simchas Beis HaShayeva did not see a simcha in his whole life. So the Gemara mentions, or the Mishnah mentions, that the greatest of the Chachamim were juggling and throwing things and doing tricks and doing somersaults, like children, like clowns, like comedians, like entertainers. And even though this would be behavior that normally would not be in accordance with their dignity, they followed the model of David HaMelech, that when you are serving Hashem, even those things that you think are not lefi chavaitcha become glorious and honorable, because they are ways that you are giving kavod to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the precedent is indeed from David HaMelech's behavior and his response to Michal Bat Shaul.